Hello friends, in the ongoing series on cultural matrix, today I am going to raise two fundamental questions. Question 1, is it that our nationalism is so fragile and insecure that it has to manifest itself only in the epidemic of sedition charges filed against those who somehow speak a different language, the language that the ruling regime does not appreciate? For instance, it does not spare even the school kid, or for that matter, the other day, when a passionate young college girl, despite her love for the country, expressed her best wishes for the well-being of the neighboring Pakistan, she has to be sent to jail and the sedition charge has to be filed against her. Is it that our nationalism is extremely fragile and insecure that it has to manifest itself in this fashion? The second question is that, is it that we are, as a society, we are becoming increasingly hostile, intolerant, and violent? And is it the end of empathy and listening, and we have become so incapable that we refuse to understand those who speak a different language, or we refuse to understand or engage in any act of conversation with the dissenters? These are two fundamental questions, and I wish to reflect on these questions, and I wish to engage with all of you. To begin with, let me make in this context two substantial arguments. My first argument is that nationalism is an ambiguous experience. There is an inherent ambiguity in the experience of nationalism, and it has to be understood. Even if, as many theoreticians argue, that the nation is a modernist construct and it is an imagined community, the fact remains that even if it is an imagined community, the emotions it generates have tremendous bearing and impact on people. People get carried away by the emotions of nationalism. And there is not everything bad about that emotions, and it is in that context I speak of the ambiguity of nationalism. To begin with, there is a very positive, life-affirming, enchanting experience centered on nationalism. Nation may be seen, felt, experienced as an entity, living entity, having a soul. Imagine, for instance, that when it is being experienced, that it is a living entity with a soul, it gives a call to people to strive for something higher, something nobler, and to come out of naked individualism and limiting identities. And it touches one's body, one's soul, one's emotions, and inspires one to engage in certain altruistic practices for the larger collective. Just think of when Swami Vivekananda, for instance, gave a call and argued that nation has a soul, and he would urge young people of the country to feel for the downtrodden, to work for the cobbler, the fisherman, the ordinary people. It was almost an enchanting experience. Or for that matter, when Nehru, in Discovery of India, would try to enchant that entire civilization and at times argue that I come to Sharnath near Banaras, and I am almost hearing that Gautam Buddha preaching his first sermon. Now these are the enchanting experiences. The land, the civilization, the people get enchanted. Or Gandhiji, after coming back from South Africa and then moving around the country from east to west, north to south, and then giving a call to people to evolve a philosophy of Swaraj and fight the British rule and create the spirit of decolonization and fearlessness. These are the very positive, enchanting experiences centered on nationalism. But my ambiguity regarding the experience of nationalism lies in the fact that it could also prove to be very ritualistic, compulsive, and constraining experience. It becomes constraining when nationalism restricts the creative flow, and it deprives us of our ability to experience the entire humanity as a whole, and it is based on boundaries, borders, and it erects a wall of separation against the nation and its other and its enemy. And that enemy could be other nation, and that enemy could be people inside. And then it degenerates into a terribly negative experience with its own history of war, violence, and this could prove to be very constraining and negative experience. It could also be a negative experience if it loses its soul and becomes merely a compulsive ritual. Just think of the following for a second. What it means if you are compelled in a cinema hall to stand up with popcorn and coffee in your hand and just compelled to express your affinity with the national anthem. Do you feel that it is really respect to Tagore's poetic sublime prayer, or it is merely a trivialization through a compulsive ritual? So it could also be very constraining, ritualistic, negative experience. And that is where I believe that entire ambiguity is implicit in the experience of nationalism. My second substantial point is that, and which is quite relevant and related to contemporary experience in India, when these three experiences, three forces, that is militarism, totalitarianism, and religious fundamentalism are combined, then the kind of nationalism that we create, that becomes extremely violent, aggressive, narcissistic. And this nationalism then is based on the psychology of fear. It seeks to create the mass psychology of fear, and it becomes extremely militaristic, totalitarian, fundamentalist, and intolerant. As a result, any voice of dissent, one who raises a critical voice, is hardly understood. Instead, through all sorts of disciplinary measures, coercive measures, and the punitive measures, all dissenting voices are curbed, suppressed, and the culture of fear is created. And then the nationalism proves to be a monster, proves to be an obstacle, and it goes against the free flow of creative ideas, and it is based on then fear, militarism, punitive measures, and violence. Something of that kind is happening. And it is here where I end my discussion today, that if as a country, if as a nation, we lose empathy, we lose the power of art of listening, and listening to those who are raising a critical voice, and even raising a critical voice against the current ruling regime, they ought to be understood. And one can understand that instead of filing sedition charges against the dissenters, only when we are willing to understand two things. First, to love the country is also to resist against all that which is unholy, which is not good for the country. And hence, for example, during the Vietnam War, if some pacifist and some noble souls in America raised their critical voice against the American government, they were not acting anti-national. Instead, their true cosmopolitanism, their internationalism, their quest for peace was trying to create a better world. Likewise, if someone, a passionate young girl, for instance, if she also, despite her love for the country, conveys her best wishes for the well-being of Pakistan, then far from seeing her as anti-national, it is important to understand her, possibly her move towards certain kind of internationalism and her urge to create a culture where India and Pakistan, far from existing as eternal enemies, can come together, can embrace one another, and we can move towards peace. Friends, it is important to understand that we are living at a time when war, violence, the might of majoritarianism, the culture of narcissism, and the mass psychology of fear have almost invaded the every sphere of existence. And it is at this juncture that you and I ought to reflect on that, think of it, and imagine and strive for a new idea of India enriched by positive, life affirming nationalism, people's nationalism, and the nationalism that is in affinity with the higher principle of internationalism and cosmopolitanism and universalism. Thank you.